China admits its COVID deaths are huge and 70% of Shanghai's 25 million residents have been infected as Beijing threatens retaliation against Western nations over restrictions on air passengers.
Chinese officials have admitted that the country's total number of COVID-related deaths is huge, with one doctor saying as many as 70% of Shanghai's 25 million residents may have been infected. The steep rise in infections came after Beijing's hardline zero-COVID approach was abruptly ended last month, quickly overwhelming hospitals and crematoriums. In a rare admission, health officials said on TV that the country was seeing an increase in the critical cases or the fatalities. However, in an attempt to play down the situation, they claimed that the surge was in line with other countries. Beijing also criticized nations that now require Chinese passengers to show a negative COVID test before entering, that include the UK and the US, warning it could take countermeasures in response. Yesterday, China's President Xi Jinping finally admitted the mistakes of his draconian zero-COVID policy, which failed to contain the virus and sparked the country's first widespread mass protests in decades. The premier acknowledged unprecedented difficulties and challenges in his New Year's Eve address to the nation and said it was only natural that his harsh lockdown measures were met with resistance. Xi dropped the zero-COVID measures on December 7, but his new strategy of living with the virus has caused infections to skyrocket, with infections currently peaking in Beijing. In the first 20 days of December, the government's top health authority estimates a staggering 248 million people, equivalent to 18% of the population, contracted the virus. China maintains that around 5,000 of its citizens have died to the virus since it first broke out in the country at the end of 2019. Experts suggest it could see 9,000 deaths per day in the ongoing wave sweeping the country. Zhao Yui, a National Health Commission official, in a rare admission told state broadcaster China Central Television, "We have a huge base, so what people feel is that the severe cases, the critical cases or the fatalities are increasing. As far as this wave is concerned, what people have felt is the absolute number, not the low percentage, of deaths to total infections. Relative to the rest of the world, the infection peaks we are faced with across the country are not unusual." Tong Zhahui, a vice president of Caoyang Hospital in Beijing, agreed that the number was large but said the relative percentage of deaths may still be low. "Think how many people around you have been infected but how many have developed critical cases or pneumonia. I think everyone has the idea," he said. Chen Rison, vice president at Ruijin Hospital and a member of Shanghai's COVID expert advisory panel, estimated that the majority of the city's 25 million people may have been infected. Now the spread of the epidemic in Shanghai is very wide, and it may have reached 70% of the population, which is 20 to 30 times more than in April and May, he told Jiangdong Studio, owned by the Communist Party mouthpiece People's Daily. If correct, it would suggest 17.5 million people have been infected in the city alone. Shanghai suffered a grueling 2-month lockdown from April, during which more than 600,000 residents were infected and many were forced to isolate in quarantine centers. But now the Omicron variant is spreading rapidly across the city. In other major cities, such as Tianjin, Chongqing and Guangzhou, Chinese health officials have suggested that the wave has already peaked. In Zhejiang province, near Shanghai, disease control authorities said that infections were peaking, with 1 million new cases in recent days. Dr. Chen said that his Shanghai hospital was seeing 1,600 emergency admissions every day, double the number prior to restrictions being lifted. Some 80% of them are COVID patients. He claimed that more than 100 ambulances arrive at the hospital every day and around half of emergency admissions are patients over the age of 65. Elderly COVID patients were found crammed in hospital corridors in Shanghai, coughing, groaning, and gasping for breath. At 2 hospitals in the city, hundreds of mostly elderly patients lay on wheeled stretchers in public areas as emergency wards filled beyond capacity. At Tongren Hospital in downtown Shanghai, The corridors overflowed with dozens of elderly patients lying on beds hooked up to 4 drips. Some patients wore oxygen masks attached to bedside canisters. A middle-aged woman in a face mask lifted a flask to the parched lips of a man hooked up to an oxygen cylinder. Near her, a medical worker wearing blue scrubs and a face visor attended to a gray-haired woman in a red jumper as she shivered under a blanket. In another hospital, arguments broke out between 2 people waiting for drips, with one woman telling an older man, "I was here first. I'm here to get a needle too." In Huashan Hospital, younger relatives stood over elderly patients to shield them from crowds of people as they waited for treatment. Doctors and nurses at hospitals in multiple cities say they have continued to treat patients despite testing positive for the virus themselves. Despite the explosion of infections, Beijing has taken issue with countries imposing restrictions on Chinese arrivals. The US, Canada, France and Japan are among several countries that now require Chinese travelers to show a negative COVID test before arrival. In the UK, passengers from the Chinese mainland, apart from Hong Kong, have to present a negative lateral flow or PCR test before boarding any flight to Britain. Ministers also plan to test a sample of passengers on arrival in the UK to check for variants, such as XBB.1.5, which has been nicknamed the Kraken. But people coming from China will be allowed to refuse a second PCR test if they choose, raising the risk they could be positive and go undetected. He added, "Since COVID-19 struck, we have put the people first and put life first all along. With extraordinary efforts, we have prevailed over unprecedented difficulties and challenges, and it has not been an easy journey for anyone. We have now entered a new phase of COVID response where tough challenges remain." He added, "What matters is that we build consensus through communication and consultation. Let's make an extra effort to pull through as perseverance and solidarity mean victory." The speech was a major shift from the celebratory tone in October when he secured a 3rd term in power at his party Congress.